Hello everyone, welcome to QXon. I am Dr. Richa Gupta, your teacher in Physiology in QXon. I will be covering general physiology for you. In this video, we will talk about structure and functions of a mammalian cell. A cell is the fundamental working unit of all organisms. It is specialized in structure and function in different organs. That means that even though the organelles, the cell structures, which are common in many cells, but various cells are specialized in structure. That means there can be cuboidal cells, there can be elongated cells like a neuron, and the organelles which are present in the cell may also vary in concentration. For example, the cells which require very high energy may have very high concentration of mitochondria. So that way, these cells are specialized in structure and function in different organs. So basically a cell is the smallest unit that is capable of performing life functions because it is the conglomeration of cells together which is actually forming a tissue and then it is forming an organ. So this is a schematic diagram representing the cell and the various organelles which are present in the cell. We will deal with each of the organelles one by one. So first let us consider the cell membrane or the plasma membrane. Cell membrane or the plasma membrane is the lipid bilayer which is surrounding the cell. This lipid bilayer actually is formed of two layers of lipid, that is by the term lipid bilayer. Why this is important is because see, each lipid has a hydrophilic end, that is which loves water. Philic means loving water, and a hydrophobic end, that means which does not like water. So there is a hydrophilic end and a hydrophobic end. So this one lipid is interacting with the another lipid with its hydrophobic end and hydrophilic end. So the hydrophilic ends of the lipid bilayer face outside and the other layer faces inside, while the hydrophobic tail face each other. So because of this, the lipid bilayer can arrange in a very simple manner with the least energy. Now in this lipid bilayer there are various types of lipids. There is a glycolipid, there is a sphingomyelin, there is cholesterol, and interspersed within the lipid bilayer are various proteins. Fundamentally, these proteins are classified into a peripheral protein and the integral protein. The peripheral protein is facing outside and basically it is not traversing the membrane. You see, it is not covering the entire lipid layer. Okay, so this is known as a peripheral protein. An integral protein, on the other hand, it is covering the lipid layer. So that is the integral. The word integral itself means the part of something, right? So it is inherent to the membrane. So that is why integral protein. A type of integral protein is transmembrane protein. So as the term indicates, transmembrane. So it is covering the entire membrane, entire lipid bilayer. So it has two faces, one facing outside and one facing inside. So because of these proteins, a cell membrane performs different types of functions. Also the lipids also have different types of functions, but we will be covering these proteins, especially the transmembrane proteins, in another lecture on transport across cell membrane. Okay. We said that peripheral proteins are attached to the surface of the membrane. But how are they attached? Well, there are two ways. First is that there are GPI linked peripheral proteins. So what is this? This GPI means glycosyl phosphatidylinositol anchors. So yes, complicated, but it's the full form of this GPI. What is there is phosphatidylinositol and which is glycated. So that is glycosyl phosphatidylinositol. Okay, and then there is this protein. So this is acting as an anchor by which our protein is attached on the surface of the membrane. So, surface can be outside also and surface can be inside also, but it is not traveling through the membrane. Okay, it is on the surface of the membrane. Then the second method by which these proteins are attached is lipidated peripheral proteins. So, there is a lipid tail. So, this is our protein and there is a lipid to which they are attached, which in turn is attached on the membrane. So, this lipid can be palmitoyl, prenyl, right. So, these are lipidated peripheral proteins. So, what is the functions of these cell membrane or plasma membrane proteins? First of all, they act as cell adhesion molecules. That means they can connect one cell to other cell, or they can connect one cell to the extracellular matrix. Then they can act as pumps, carriers, ion channels. Okay, and these we will discuss in detail in transport across cell membrane. Then they act as receptors. That means if there is any hormone or any chemical present, it can bind to the receptor and the information can convey to the inside of the cell. Then they also act as enzymes. Some example is like these peripheral proteins which we discussed, right. So, GPI anchors, GPI linked proteins can act as alkaline phosphates, and they can also act as various antigens present on the cell membrane. So, these three which we discussed, pumps, carriers and ion channel, are basically responsible for transporting across cell membrane. Not only that, the arrangement of proteins makes the cell polar, what is known as cell polarity, and this is also because of cytoskeletal organization in the cell. So, what happens, see, if this is a schematic diagram representing one cell and here there are other cells. So, the cell membrane surrounds the entire cell, isn't it? Here also cell membrane will be there, here also cell membrane will be there. But functionally, the cell is divided into an apical membrane, right? And the rest membrane is known as basolateral membrane. This is because there are certain proteins here. Okay, so the proteins present on the apical membrane cannot move on the cell membrane. Normally, proteins can move along the cell membrane. But because of the presence of certain proteins which form the tight junction, the proteins present on the apical membrane cannot move to the basolateral membrane, and the proteins which are present on the basolateral membrane cannot move to the apical membrane. So, functionally, because of the arrangement of the proteins, apical membrane differs with that of the basolateral membrane. So, it is giving the cell a kind of a specialization in function. Plus, the cytoskeletal organization is also something like that. There is plus end, there is minus end, that we will see in somewhat short while. So, what are the functions of cell membrane? First of all, you see that the cell membrane is actually separating the contents of the cell from that of the outside. So, it is acting as a barrier, separating the cell contents from that of the surroundings. But no cell lives in isolation. So, this barrier is actually a selective barrier. That means it allows something in and out and prevents the movement of some substances. For example, there may be some channels, ion channels, which allows movement of ions, right? But on the other hand, there may be absence of other channels. Say suppose the calcium channels may not be there, and it may prevent the movement of the calcium, right? Also, it allows for reception of information from the surroundings. So, if there is any change in chemical concentration outside the cell, there will be receptors which are present on the cell membrane, and those chemicals can act on the receptors and the information can reach to the cell. So, cell membrane allows for receiving any information from the environment. Third, there is transduction of this information. Transduction word means there is conversion of one form of energy to other form of energy. So, say suppose there is some chemical concentration change outside the cell, it should lead to conveying of information into the cell, isn't it? So this conveying of information may vary from cell to cell. For example, in a neuron, right? If a neuron receives neurotransmitter signals from other neuron, what happens? The neuron receiving the signal generates a potential change, and finally there is action potential generation. So there is transduction of information. Chemical energy of neurotransmitter is being transduced to electrical energy. So that is also the function of cell membrane. Then there is cell to cell communication. So how two cells talk to each other, communicate with each other, that is also brought about by cell membrane. There may be presence of certain receptors on the cell membrane which are responsible for cell-cell communication. Then there are cell-cell junctions. So there are communicating junctions. So some substances from one cell can pass to other cell. Then there is say suppose tight junctions which do not allow movement of any substance in between two cells. So it is like preventing the movement of any substance in between two cells. The details will be dealt in other lectures.